Okay, good afternoon, one and all. It gives me a great pleasure to moderate this session of free paper in Dr. Ishwar Chandra Hall. So today's judges are Dr. Neeta Shanbag. Madam is Head of Department, D.Y. Patil Medical College, Navi Mumbai. She is most praised head of the department by the PGs and very closely associated with all the PGs.
Thank you, sir.
Other judge is Dr. Subhash Joshi. He is a senior ophthalmologist from Buldana. He is presently a president of Buldana Ophthalmic Society. Our third judge is Dr. Darshana Rathod. Madam is AP at Nayar Hospital, Mumbai, and she is very senior oculoplastic surgeon of our region. So the first free paper topic is a tele-screening program to evaluate prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in rural population in central India by Dr. Prashant Bulchandani.
All the best to all the kids. Do well, all of you. Okay. Without any pressure, just present your papers.
Dr. Prashant.
Yes, sir. Are my slides visible?
Yeah.
So good afternoon to all. I'm going to present a free paper on a community-based telescreening program to evaluate the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in self-reported diabetic patients attending the PHC hospital in rural population in central India. Diabetic retinopathy is important cause of preventable blindness. Problem statement according to NPCV currently depends on the screening of diabetic retinopathy in high-risk population in India. Most effective strategy of diabetic screening is combination of mydriatic retinal photography with indirect ophthalmoscopy. Lack of diabetic screening equipment at primary and secondary level of healthcare system often lead to overcrowding of patients at the tertiary care institutes. Our aim is to detect the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy amongst the known diabetic patient in PHC across the Bhandara districts of Nagpur. Our study uses a novel indigenous sleek smartphone-based device for retinal color photography. These are some of the cases which we encountered during our screening program, in which we can easily detect the diabetic changes. Material and method. It was a community-based cross-sectional study. Sample size was 1,133 patients. Duration of the study was 3 months. Inclusion criteria was patient with known case of diabetes attending the primary healthcare center. Exclusion criteria was all non-diabetic patient, narrow angle suspect, and patient with media opacity. Random blood sugar and blood pressure was measured. Complete anterior segment examination and dilatation of pupil was done unless contraindicated. Visual acuity was assessed on Snellen chart. All instruments were calibrated and data was collected by one ophthalmologist and 2 optometrists who have received special training in the procedure of the study. Stereoscopic fundus examination was done on fundus on phone, and images were uploaded to cloud via smartphone application, and grading of retinopathy was done on ATDRS classification. Results: out of 1,211 subjects, 1,133 patients were enrolled for the screening program, out of which 51.72% were male and 48.27% were female. The overall prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in subjects was 10.76%. Mean age was 58.66%, plus minus 10.63 years. Mean RBS was 161.17, plus minus 65.43 milligram per DL. These were some of our results. Results were calculated in the basis of age, treatment methods, smoking status. Most of our patients were on oral hypoglycemics, and very less were insulin and non-compliant. majority of the patient had history of hypertension. Some minority of the patients had ischemic heart disease and strokes, but in out of hypertensive patients, only 11 patients had diabetic retinopathy. Prevalence of diabetic retinopathy was calculated on the basis of socioeconomic status, which was classified under the Kuppuswamy scale, and the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy on the basis of duration of diabetes was 9.75% in first 5 years, 14.45% in 6 to 15 years, 13.98% in 16 to 25 years, and 14.28% more than 25 years. Prevalence of diabetic retinopathy according to the socio-economic status was 13.72% in upper middle class, 12.76% in lower class, 11.24% in lower middle class, 9.82% in lower middle, and 0% in upper class. Out of 1,133 patients screened, diabetic retinopathy was found in 122 patients, out of which 31.96% patient had mild NPDR, 42.62% patient had moderate NPDR, 4.09% patient has severe NPDR, and 5.73% had PDR. 18.03% had clinically significant macular edema. Prevalence of diabetic retinopathy came out to be 10.76%, which was similar to the AIO study, in which was 21.27% in total India, and 12.27% in central zone. In South India, so studies were done to calculate the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy by Raman et al. 18%, Rima et al. 17.6%, and Narendra et al. 26.2%. On categorization on the basis of age group, subjects were 61. Majority of the subjects that had diabetic retinopathy were elderly patients. Uniqueness of our study was the screening program was done under on fundus on phone, and patients were studied. 100% of the patient underwent retinal examination over teleophthalmology. Photographic documentation is standard practice for National Diabetic Retinopathy Screening Services UK. Reported benefits of retinal fundus imaging are that they allow better standardization, permanent documentation, and accurate reporting by a reading center. Fundus on phone resolves the issues of around the image capture, transmission, and other issues of reading, grading, reporting, and providing advice to patient. And crucially, the uptake and utilization of available care in timely manner. In our study, factor that didn't influence the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy was smoking status, history of hypertension, stroke, and ischemic heart disease. In our study, prevalence of diabetic retinopathy was more in oral hypoglycemic than in insulin. Our study estimated the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in Nagpur district at 10.76%. This information has a great impact on public health awareness program, highlighting the need of regular eye checkup in educating masses with diabetes. The combination of affordability, portability, and easy transmission of images and other features of fundus on phone system provides a platform not only for in-clinic use, but also for planning mass diabetic retinal screening program in India. Limitation of study are, the study was defined as cross-sectional study, so we could not account for the temporal relationship between the potential risk factors and outcomes. Short duration of study was there, and moreover, random blood sugar was assessed as a glycemic control due to lack of facilities in the study area. Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Any questions, madam, for Prashant? Neeta, madam, you have to unmute.
How much importance was given to rigid control of diabetes when all this was done?
At that PSC, ma'am, there are all the medicine people used to take regular intervals, RBS and BP of the patient. They were doing that thing for free, and patient used to come for routine checkup within 3 months. So there was tight. No, ma'am, that was not available at that center. So we were taking random blood sugar levels on.
So difficult ho jata hai na. Hemoglobin A1C gives you an average of how they are managing their diabetes. At that particular moment, they may have just not taken any sweets on that particular day or something like that. So hemoglobin A1C should be made available at that center. I mean, after you finish this paper, and you can at least send it across as a message that hemoglobin A1C is a must. I think we should operate also with hemoglobin A1C rather than that blood sugar fasting PP on the previous day. It is much more fruitful. Otherwise, good presentation.
Yes.
And Dr. Prashant, you were able to get 1,000 patients in 3 months?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Which itself says that we have to create more awareness about diabetes.
Ma'am, only the patients with media opacity or patients with angle closure glaucoma or suspects were excluded. Rest all had clear fundus, and I've shown the clinical photographs in which we can easily screen the patients with fundus on phone at tertiary care centers or primary and secondary level also.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Prashant, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
The next paper is from Dr. Gyanendra Kumar. Assessment of anxiety and depression in patients with diabetic retinopathy.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, my topic of presentation for the paper is assessment of anxiety and depression in patients with diabetic retinopathy. So, vision is one of the most important sensory part of the human information system, and vision loss due to diabetic retinopathy usually irreversible and progressive in nature. It leads to inability to perform daily routine activity and can be a risk for stable mental health. So patients remain continuously in mental stress, worry, and may develop anxiety and depression associated disorders. As we know, depression is a global public health problem, and its prevalence is increasing every year. And studies have found that visual impairment is associated with the depressive symptoms. So individuals with both diabetes and visual impairment are likely to experience a considerable number of depressive symptoms. Anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease about something with an uncertain outcome, and continuous mental stress can lead to the elevated cortisol level, and that elevated cortisol level can lead to the negatively affect autonomic nervous system and vascular system, and as well as affect blood sugar level. So if a diabetic retinopathy patient is suffering from mental stress, anxiety, or depression, it can lead to poor diabetes control, increased rate of disease progression, poor prognosis, and increased strain on the family functioning, and increased healthcare cost. So most of the time, ophthalmologists do not consider psychosocial aspect and impact on patient when they deal with the patient with sight-threatening chronic ophthalmological diseases like diabetic retinopathy. So a better understanding of patient-reported quality of life feedback can help in improving doctor-patient interaction. And if a patient is suffering from mental stress, anxiety, or depression, early diagnosis can be done and various customized treatment options can be provided. And if needed, patient can be referred to the psychiatrist for counseling and treatment of serious mental disorders. So this holistic approach can improve quality of life of patient and treatment compliance and result of the treatment. Hence, evaluation of anxiety and depression is essential in diabetic retinopathy patients. So my aim of the study was to study impact of diabetic retinopathy on patient psychology, and objective was to study prevalence of depression as well as anxiety in patient with diabetic retinopathy patient. So material and methodology, study was conducted at retina department of a tertiary eye care center located in Western Maharashtra. And study population, all cases of diabetic retinopathy who visited the retina clinic at the hospital were the study population. My sample size was based on the previous study. It was 72. And type of study, cross-sectional observational type of study. Study duration was 12 months. Inclusion criteria of my study: patient in the age group between 18 years to 70 years, and diagnosed case of diabetic retinopathy. Exclusion criteria were patient below 18 years or above 70 years of age at the time of diagnosis. Coexisting disorders that can affect best corrected visual acuity, such as age-related macular degeneration, cataract, uveitis, glaucoma, etc. Hearing and cognitive impairments. If patient is taking any psychotropic drug or other systemic conditions like renal failure, cancer, or hypertension. Methodology: a cross-sectional observational study was carried on 72 patients attending retina clinic of tertiary eye hospital. After getting approval from institutional ethics committee, retina informed consent was taken, and all diabetic retinopathy patients underwent thorough ophthalmic examination, and the severity of diabetic retinopathy was measured in the Versailles. Anxiety was assessed by generalized anxiety disorder 7 scale, and depression was assessed by the patient health questionnaire 9 scale, and response analyzed statistically using SPSS version 21 software. PHQ-9 contains a total score or range of 0 to 27, and the answer of the patient are marked from 0 to 3, with 0 that represent not at all and 3 indicate almost everyday symptoms. So it contained 9 questions in total. So all the patients who got a score of more than 5 were referred to a psychiatrist for detailed diagnostic examination and treatment if needed. And the next slide is grading of the PHQ-9 score. If score is less than 4 or 4, none or minimum symptom. If my score PHQ-9 score is 5 to 9, then mild depression. 10 to 14, moderate depression. 15 to 19, moderately severely depression, and more than 20 score was severely major depression. Generalized anxiety disorder 7 contains 7 items which measures severity of various anxiety disorders. So it contains a total score range of 0 to 21, and the answer of the patient are marked from 0 to 3, with 0 that represent not at all symptoms and 3 indicate nearly everyday symptoms. So it contains 7 questions in total, and GAD score was classified in 5, 10, and 15, and 5 is taken as the cutoff point for mild, 10 is taken for moderate, and 15 is taken for severe anxiety, respectively, when it was used as a screening tool. So all the patients who got a score of more than 5 were referred to a psychiatrist for detailed diagnostic examination and treatment if needed, because it indicated presence of anxiety disorders. So result of my study was that in this study, male population was more in comparison to female, and the mean age of the sample size was 57.46 years, and there was no significant age difference between the male and female who present to the hospital. And this chart is showing the gender distribution. Second chart is as we can see there. In this study, prevalence of anxiety was around 40% diabetic retinopathy patient, and prevalence of depression was found 31.9% DR patient. So this diagram showing distribution of anxiety.
2 minutes more, doctor.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah. Continue, please.
Yes. This diagram showing distribution of anxiety among diabetic retinopathy patient. Around 60% having no anxiety, around 18% patients showing mild anxiety, 11% showing moderate, and 11% were showing severe anxiety. Next chart, next diagram representing distribution of depression in DR patient. So 68% patient having no symptom or minimal symptoms. Around 8% per patient were having mild depression, 9% patient having moderate, and 11.1% patient having moderately severe depression, and 2.8% patient having severely depression. So we found that 29% patients do not like to involve in social gathering, and this study also found that vision-threatening diabetic retinopathy significantly affect mental health. Association between the vision-threatening diabetic retinopathy and anxiety and depression were found significant, for which p-value was less than 0.05. Difference of management compliance between patient having anxiety and patient not having anxiety was insignificant. Difference of management compliance between the depressed and non-depressed patient was significant, because p-value was less than 0.05. Other salient result of the study was anxiety and depression more in married patient in comparison to unmarried. and prevalence of anxiety and depression more in the less income group in comparison to the higher income group. And the association between the visual impairment and anxiety and depression was found significant, as we can see in these tables. Effect of visual impairment on the anxiety, showing the p-value less than 0.05. So total percentage of visually impaired patient was found 26%, out of which 4.2% were having anxiety and 22% having severe anxiety. And effect of visual impairment on anxiety was statistically significant. And total percentage of visually impaired patients was found 26%, out of which 19.4% were depressed. And effect of visual impairment on depression was statistically significant. So discussion in this study, male population was more in comparison to the female, and male patient constituted around 2/3 of the study sample size in comparison to the female. So the mean age of the sample was 57.46 years. So our study data was demographically similar to previous study done by Goenth et al., in which male constituted 67% and female constituted 32%, with mean age of 64 years. So the number of female patients in comparison to male was less. It may be due to the social stigma, fear to go to hospital, and ignorance by family members, and awareness about the eye diseases. So overall prevalence of depression in diabetic retinopathy patient was 32%, and anxiety was around 41%. It is also observed that in mild and moderate NPDR, severe depression was absent. For depression,
Time over, doctor.
Joan et al. Found prevalence of depression 35%. Similar result also found by Goenth et al. They found prevalence of anxiety 22% and depression 15.4. They used a hospital anxiety and depression scale. So difference in value for anxiety and depression between our study and their study most probably due to use of different screening tool for anxiety and depression. In our study, we used PHQ-9 scale for depression, and which has better sensitivity and specificity than Hertz scale for depression. And for anxiety, we use GAD-7 scale, which has better sensitivity and specificity than Hertz scale for anxiety screening. So conclusion of my study was overall prevalence of anxiety was 40% and prevalence of depression was 32% DR patient in our study. So diabetic retinopathy can be a risk for stable mental health. And diabetic retinopathy was associated with negative impact on psychological and social life and management compliance. GAD-7 and PHQ-9 were good screening tool to assess anxiety and depression. So there should be more use of screening tool like GAD-7 and PHQ-9 and Hertz score for psychological assessment in diabetic retinopathy patient in ophthalmological practice. So we recommend psychological assessment should be done of every DR patient, regardless of the stage and duration of the disease. So this holistic approach can improve quality of the life of patient and treatment compliance and result of the treatment. Thank you.
Thank you, Gyanendra. Madam, any questions, please?
Was any baseline behavioral pattern of the patient studied before you enrolled him into the study?
Yes, ma'am. There were two studies. One is conducted in the China and one is conducted in the South Korea.
Suppose a patient walked into your OPD and you want to check the anxiety at this level. Now, there are some patients who basically have a problem with their psych. This
Yes.
gets overlaid because of the diabetes. So how do you know that it is the diabetes which is causing it and not an inherent problem?
My aim of study was just to find out the prevalence of the anxiety and depression, not due to the diabetes.
No. Any chronic disease is going to have a effect on the mental psyche of the patient because he doesn't like to be a patient.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So unless we have a baseline, if this patient was perfectly normal or perfectly okay before the diabetes began, how can we say that all this is because of diabetes?
So that was not my aim of study. My aim of study was to find out the psychological problem in the patient and to improve that. So if it not may be due to the diabetes or it may have patient have previously that problem.
When you treated, did it have an effect on the patient's diabetes pattern also?
Sorry, ma'am.
When you treated the patient, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you treated, what did it have an effect on his basic diabetic manifestations and his blood sugar levels?
Yes, ma'am, and that and also was improvement in the patient compliance when we counsel for the about course of disease, impact of the disease, and we counsel that if you control the disease very well, things are going to be okay. Then compliance were great,
The
and
medication was given to them to allay their anxiety and their depression.
that for that part we refer to the psychiatrist to treat the disease.
No, because these drugs also have side effects. No, so did you study on that also?
No, ma'am, that was
You
not.
understand what I'm trying to tell you? The
Yes, ma'am.
awareness and the counseling is a part which even we can do. But when
Yes.
you send these people for depression and anxiety or to psychiatrist and he puts them on medications, those medications are not very pleasant to the patient.
Yes, ma'am.
And if you're going to give them on a chronic basis, those medications also cause problems in the patient. So we cannot have a blanket thing that you go there and get treated for the same.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that studied? That is what my point is.
No, ma'am.
That needs to be studied. No? That's a limitation of the study.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Gyanendra.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
The next paper is by Dr. Shweta Bandopadhyay. She is going to present a study to assess the respiratory, eye, ear health problem among the traffic policemen in Nasik.
Good afternoon all. I am presenting a cross-section study to assess respiratory, eye and ear health problems among traffic police personnel in Nashik. We all know health is multifactorial and it is influenced by an interaction with social, behavioral and physical factors in the environment. The physical factors playing the most important role, and they are as follows: heat, cold, humidity, light, noise, vibration and ionizing radiation. Occupational hazards cause early deaths worldwide. The traffic policemen are toiling hard for the general public and they are more exposed to occupational hazards. They work in extremely pitiable working conditions, like they're standing for 8 to 12 hours in pollution, amongst the bellowing horns and the dust, smoke and fumes of vehicles. The health hazards get more severe when the duration of exposure increases. So it is the responsibility of the health personnel to help them take care of their health, as many of these health problems are preventable. The aims and objectives of the studies were to assess the prevalence of respiratory, eye, and ear morbidities among the traffic police, to create awareness about health problems with its prevention, and to inform the superior authorities of the vulnerable group and motivate them to take precautions to prevent the disease. The selection criteria was inclusion criteria: traffic policemen working within 10-kilometer radius of Nashik city, age group between 20 to 60 years, and officers who were in continuous service since 1 year. We excluded policemen who were working in the non-traffic zone. Materials and methods: the sample size was 196 traffic policemen. The study period extended from February to April 2018, and it was a cross-sectional study. Institutional Ethics Committee approval was taken and permission was taken from the higher authorities. Informed consent was also taken from the participants. The data obtained was in 3 sections, namely demographic data, then questionnaire and clinical tests and examination. The questionnaire was for assessment of signs and symptoms like acute and chronic wheezing, coughing, breathlessness, hemoptysis, chest pain, diminution of vision, redness, itching, watering in eyes, pain, discharge from the ear. Clinical tests and examinations included electrocardiogram, pulmonary function test, chest X-ray, audiometry, visual acuity testing by Snellen stat, slit lamp examination, refraction, and fundoscopy. With the help of the questionnaire, the clinical examination, and appropriate tests, the respiratory, visual, and auditory mobilities were assessed. Chi-square test was used for data analysis, and the p-value was less than 0.05 and was considered as statistically significant. No invasive procedures were performed. Coming to results, 196 traffic police personnel participated in the study and they underwent respiratory, eye, and ear examination. Mean age of the participants was 40.4 years. 51.5% were below or equal to the age of 40 years, while 95% 48.5% were above the age of 40 years. 89.3% of the traffic police personnel were males, the rest of them were females. So the prevalence we found out was for respiratory disease, it was 29.6%. For eye diseases, it was 25%. For ear disease, it was 20.4%. The respiratory morbidity which was encountered were restrictive and obstructive lung diseases, chronic sinusitis, sleep disordered breathing, allergic sinusitis. Ocular morbidity seen was refractive error 14.8%, allergic conjunctivitis 9.2%, cataract 7.1%, and pterygium 3.1%. Sensory neural hearing loss was the most common ear disorders. Then coming to the duration of working, 58.7% of the policemen had been there in service for more than 10 years. 70.9% were working from 5 to 10 years, and 23.5% had been working for less than 5. Discussion: the prevalence of respiratory, eye, and ear morbidity was 29.6%, 25%, and 24% respectively. Restrictive lung disease was the most common. Respiratory morbidity, refractive error, allergic conjunctivitis, and cataract were common eye disorders. Sensory neural hearing loss was the most common ear morbidity. Age more than 40 years, more than 10 years service duration, and presence of comorbidities like diabetes and hypertension significantly were associated with respiratory and ear diseases. In a similar study done on traffic policemen by Sridhar et al., 24.5% of eye disorders were found, like burning sensation, redness, watering, and itching. Then Santosh et al. Reported eye itching in 32.46% of traffic policemen in their study done in Solapur. So this study stressed the need to give attention to the risk of specific occupational morbidity which the traffic police personnel are vulnerable. So this was our conclusion. The most common morbidity was respiratory disorders, followed by eye disorders and then ear disorders. The study highlights the burden of the respiratory, eye, and ear morbidity amongst the policemen in the current study that warrants attention. At the end of the study, we had given the report of the statistical report. The statistical report had been handed over to the Commissioner of Police, and all the traffic policemen, they were addressed and they were told about the important protective measures that they should take while in duty, like using caps, use of masks, then they should wear sunglasses in the heat.
2 minutes, doctor.
Pardon? These are the references. Thank you.
Hello.
Madam, any questions?
Sir.
Good afternoon, Joshi sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, ma'am, you have not introduced any test for dry eye because as a part of occupation, the policemen, specifically the traffic policemen, they are constantly exposed to pollution and sunlight and the vehicle exhaust and all.
Shamas test was performed. It's a mistake. I should have mentioned it in the slide.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Because they're constantly being exposed to the sunlight and the dry atmosphere.
Yeah.
So they go from
dry work should be done in all policemen for the accuracy of your paper. Okay, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam, out of these patients, how many were diabetic?
I don't know.
Anything you have got? Number of patients?
Right now, I'm not having that slide, sir.
Okay.
What was the controls for this control sample? Control sample to just compare whether the general population or other occupational persons they are exposed to such environment.
It was not a comparative study, so
Okay.
controls we didn't do.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, thank you, madam. So our next paper present is by Dr. Rajesh Joshi. And paper presented by him is Incidence and Risk Factor for Vitreous Prolapse in Resident Performing MSICS, sorry.
Yeah. Good afternoon, one and all, respected judges and my dear friends. I'm going to present this paper on incidence and risk factor for vitreous prolapse in residents performing manual small incision cataract surgery in tertiary eye care center. Nothing to disclose. Cataract is most commonly performed surgery worldwide, and the burden of blindness due to cataract continues to increase in developing countries. There is a need of competent ophthalmologists to tackle the problem. Due to late presentation of patients for cataract surgery, hard cataracts are prevalent in Asian population. And manual small incision cataract surgery is preferred technique for cataract surgery in developing countries due to cost effectiveness and less dependency on machine. Residency programs in developing countries, they focus mainly on ECC and manual small incision cataract surgery than phacoemulsification. And the main issue during learning of manual small incision cataract surgery is vitreous loss. So this study, most of the studies have focused on findings of incidence of vitreous loss in fellows and practitioners. However, none focused on correlative factors and corrective measures to be taken to prevent vitreous loss in postgraduates. This was prospective observational study, which was carried out from 2017 to December 2019. 7 junior residents in third year, they were recruited for various cataract surgeries which were given to them on 490 patients. Ethical committee was obtained from the Government Medical College, Nagpur. Patients having immature or mature cataract allocated to residents included in the study were observed by the attending teacher either through the side scope or on the screen while performing surgeries. These were the exclusion criteria: patient with only one eye, pseudo-exfoliation, small pupil subluxated cataract, post-vitrectomized eye, posterior polar cataract, primary open or closed angle glaucoma, traumatic cataract, and complicated cataract. The surgeries were performed under peribulbar anesthesia from superior side, and it was standard small incision cataract surgery, which was nucleus removal by viscoexpression method, cortical aspiration, IOL implantation, and securing the tunnel. Supervised surgeon, they monitored the phase of posterior capsular rent which occurred with vitreous prolapse and handled the case later on. Data about demographic profile and everything was entered in MS Excel sheet. The data was expressed in mean and standard deviation and number and percentage. Fisher's exact test was used for categorical variance, whereas student test t-test was used for continuous variable. The confidence interval for calculation of odds ratio was 95%, and univariate and multivariate logistic regression was performed. P-value less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. This shows the demographic of the patients included in the study group. There were maximum of mature senile cataract followed by brown and immature senile cataract. Average surgeries performed by resident in the study was 68, that is ranged from 45 to 80. Incidence of vitreous loss in the study was 2%, that is 10 out of 490 patients had vitreous loss, and 5 eyes developed PCR without vitreous loss. Steps of manual small incision cataract surgery in which vitreous loss occurred was irrigation and aspiration, that is 5 out of 10 patients had vitreous loss in irrigation and aspiration phase of the surgery. This shows the association between the clinical characteristics and vitreous loss. In fact, demographic profile has nothing to do with the vitreous loss, that is age, sex, eye of the patient, hypertension, diabetes, and blood thinners. However, the anterior capsular extension has statistically significant correlation with the vitreous loss. That is, 5 patients had vitreous loss in which they had extended capsular axis. On univariate analysis, the anterior capsular extension immature cataract and the irrigation aspiration phase of the cataract surgery had significant correlation with the vitreous loss. On multivariate analysis, immature senile cataract, then the extension of the anterior capsule and the cortical aspiration had significant correlation with the vitreous loss. In discussion, incidence of vitreous loss in the present study was 2%. The rate of PCR in MSICS, which was carried out in practitioners and fellows, not in the residents in various studies, was 0.14 to 1.9%. Reason for the inconsistent reporting of vitreous loss could be difference in the surgical technique, exclusion and inclusion criteria, training program schedule, and supervised and unsupervised technique. PCR identification is crucial to prevent post-op complications. Supervised surgeries have been found to have less complications than unsupervised surgery. Manual small incision cataract surgery supervised study in USA has shown 1 in 52 cases had vitreous loss, and therefore unsupervised surgeries have more incidence of vitreous loss. Older patients have been found to have more complications than younger patients. Similar observation was found by other methods, but no such preponderance was seen in our study. Right and left eye. One of the authors in Indian study has found that intraoperative complications are more in left eye compared to right eye, but in our study, vitreous loss was observed equally in both the eyes. Immature senile cataract, intraoperative factors such as irrigation and aspiration, cortical aspiration, and anterior capsular extension these are the independent factor for incidence of vitreous loss. The limitation of the study was it was a single center study. We recommend multi-center study with inclusion of more patients and inclusion of more residents. Multiple surgeons were
2 minutes more, doctor.
Long randomized study prone for selection bias. Vitreous loss rate was 2%. In our study, resident requires strict supervision while performing certain types of steps in manual small incision cataract surgery like capsulorhexis, nucleus delivery, and cortical aspiration. This finding may serve as a guide for further trainers for residents learning small incision. So what is the solution? Designing of surgical schedule may ensure uniformity in postgraduate training in surgical procedure may solve the problem. We have designed this study along with MOS and MUHS and forwarded this all schedule to MUHS. Thanks for your patience listening.
Thank you, Rajesh. Rajesh, I want to ask, this irrigation aspiration was done by Simcoe cannula only or by manual it was?
It was by Simcoe cannula only, sir.
And that was done from the main incision only? No,
that was from the side port.
Side port.
Side port, which was used for performing capsulorhexis also.
From side.
Capsulorhexis fossa.
So did these children have any simulated training done before giving them cases?
No, madam. In fact, they were GR3 and the training started in the later stage of GR1 only, like 6 months. And they had a schedule. Like initially, they assisted a senior surgeon. Then they were given steps of small incision cataract surgery like conjunctival flap making, then scleral tunnel, capsulorhexis. And then independently in GR2, they started performing manual small incision cataract surgery. So that's why we selected GR3.
Not on both sides, fixed eyes, nothing like that.
No, in fact, we tried them on enucleated eyes, which were not utilized for keratoplasty purposes.
Give them volume, they will do well, but in most of the situations, the volume is not available. So then all and sundry, some alternative method to teach them has to be invoked.
Yeah, in fact, simulated training is always good. In fact, ISMSICS has come out with a new simulator that is good, very nice, but it is very costly affair to procure them in particularly government setups. And second thing is teaching them on goat's eye, but the goat's eye do not give real feeling of performing surgery. It collapses. There are some methods also for to harden these eyes, like injecting formalin inside the nucleus. But sometimes there are logistic problems also bringing these goat's eyes and performing surgeries on them.
I agree with you. Supervised training is one of the best things that can happen. And as long as there are teachers who are willing to do that for the residents, I think there should never be any shortage of anybody learning small incision cataract surgery, which is probably the bread and butter of every child who finishes ophthalmology now.
Yes,
Great
ma'am.
paper. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next paper is by Dr. Ketki Shah Bhatt. She will present ocular manifestation of COVID-19 patient in a tertiary care hospital of a rural Maharashtra. Dr. Ketki.
This share screen. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank MOSCON for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present my paper. I'm Dr. Ketki Bhatt. I'm working as Associate Professor in ACPM Medical College, Dhule. My topic is ocular manifestation of COVID-19 patients in tertiary care hospital of rural Maharashtra. So my aim of the study was to study ocular manifestations in post-COVID-19 patients, and we also suggest recommendations based on the observations. After taking permission from the institutional ethical committee, we started with this single central hospital-based prospective study. It was done from April 2020 to June 2021, and we included 104 patients in the study. All these patients had a history or they were having COVID-19 infection at the time of examination, and all of them had ocular symptoms. Age group was 20 years and above, and we included both the sexes. For the evaluation purpose, a detailed history about the ophthalmological problem was noted, including origin, duration, progress of the ophthalmological symptoms. Slenden's best corrected visual acuity was noted in all the patients except the patients who were in ICU. Slit lamp examination was done thoroughly in all the cases and for diagnosis and for the treatment purpose. Whenever possible, intraocular pressure checkup and fundus examination was done. We asked the treatment history in all the patients in the form of dexamethasone injection and injection remdesivir. The patient who came to us with the symptoms of ptosis or ocular symptoms, oculoplastic symptoms, we advise CT orbit and PNS whenever required, along with the other routine blood investigations, which were already done in these cases as they were having treatment for COVID infection. So coming to the result, this slide shows that out of these 104 patients which we included in our study, viral conjunctivitis was the most common in 49 patients. It was followed by orbital cellulitis in 21 cases. To our surprise, we had 14 cases of ptosis patients. These patients came with the only complaints of ptosis. They had good extraocular movements. Also, they had good best corrected visual acuity. So only pupil sparing severe ptosis was seen in 14 cases. Total ophthalmoplegia with no PL on presentation was seen in 13 cases out of 104. Orbital apex syndrome with impending intracranial spread was seen in 5 patients. So more about mucormycosis. As I have already mentioned in this slide, we had orbital cellulitis with mucormycosis in 21 cases. Our hospital is a tertiary care hospital where we have dedicated COVID and mucor treatment ward. So with the help of dental and ENT faculty, we did treatment of these mucor cases. So male outnumbered female patients. All the patients, like 21 patients had oral orbital cellulitis. So out of them, almost all, like 16 patients were given oral posaconazole in the treatment. Also injection amphotericin B was given in the peribulbar form in 12 patients. Surgical debridement was required in 12 patients again. And the patients who had impending intracranial spread, we did 2 patients में orbital exenteration procedure. It is stated in the pathology that compromised mucociliary clearance in such patients because they are having more time in ICU setup. So they have a compromised mucociliary clearance with immunocompromised state, especially in diabetics is suggested in the pathology of mucormycosis. So in the review of literature, we found that Tyagi et al. And Sindhuja et al. Have also reported conjunctivitis as the most common ocular symptom in the COVID-19 patients. While one study reported from Wuhan, China, have reported dry eyes and blurred vision as the most common presenting complaint. Similar study done on 120 Indian patients by Sen M et al. Have results similar to our study. There is one Chen et al. Have concluded that they have reported this, they have found out with this hypothesis that frequent hand-to-eye contact may be the risk factor for conjunctival congestion, and these patients come up with the conjunctivitis-like symptoms. Agrawal et al. Have done meta-analysis of 16 studies, and they have almost studied 2,500 or something patients. And they have observed that 11.6% of COVID-related ocular symptoms were seen in out of these studies. So out of 2,500 population, they have observed 11.6% of COVID-related ocular symptoms. So to conclude, we would like to state that COVID-19 can cause various ocular symptoms like viral conjunctivitis to severe mucormycosis. We require multidisciplinary approach in the form of dental and ENT help for the early diagnosis and treatment. High degree of suspicion, as we have seen in ptosis patients, like high degree of suspicion and prompt treatment can definitely reduce the ocular morbidity in patients, and it can definitely help in already debilitated patients with COVID. These are the references we have quoted in the study. So I would like to thank all of you for your patient listening, and I would really like to go back to the physical conference as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ketaki. Madam, any questions, please?
No retinal findings you found, because COVID is most associated with thromboembolic phenomena. So no CRPs, no SRF fluid, all these things you did.
Sir, fundus examination was done in all these cases, but not significant fundus anomaly was found in COVID-19 patients.
And any herpes, reactivation of herpes and all you never got?
And the reactivation of the herpes, madam, reactivation of herpes was seen in only one case, madam.
Yes. Also, I mean, there were so many incidents of optic neuritis, nerve palsies,
yes,
CRVOs, and all vascular accidents,
yes,
optic neuritis. All these things were very rampant at the time when COVID was on.
Yes, madam.
So from whatever you are presenting, none of these are there in your study. That is why I'm asking you, because the maximum number of patients we saw were all these things.
Madam, in our
setup, was an incidental finding, which most of the time, because they didn't want to get from home, most of the time I would detect a red eye on teleconsulting. They would never come to a clinic for a red eye, but when they actually came to a clinic, these were the findings that we got.
Right, ma'am. No, but ma'am, in our study, it was.
So what was the duration that you saw from the time they got COVID?
Ma'am, after 15 days and more, like once they are treated for COVID, 15 days and more.
Post quarantine and more, and whenever they had symptoms.
Yes, madam. Some of them were active during ICU, and some of the post quarantine.
Whatever you said is all right, but these other 4 findings which I'm telling you, CRVO. I mean, the minute we saw CRVO, we would tell them, "Kya tumhara COVID test hua hai kya?" I mean, it was so rampant.
Okay.
The minute I would see a CRVO on the fundus, I would ask him, and then half the time they would give me a history that they were admitted for COVID, or they would get a COVID test done and it would come positive.
Yes, ma'am.
So thromboembolic phenomena now is rampant, and this is the reason why even the nerve palsies were so rampant.
Yes,
and herpes, of course, because the immunity of the patient was down, either it was reactivation or fresh infections.
Yes,
so
reactivation.
These 3 things were maximally seen all over.
Okay.
So it's very, I don't know.
So, ma'am, one patient.
Because they are having a lot of morbidities. So if you have not seen them, lucky for the patient.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Ketaki. Sir, please.
Okay.
No, sir, continue, please. Okay, the next paper is by Dr. Rituja Sapkal. She will be presenting visual impairment in patient with CKD. Dr. Rituja.
You are sharing screen. ते कसं बंद करू? Stop share.
Dr. Rituja, please.
Yes, sir. So is my screen visible?
No.
Just a second, sir. So is it visible?
Yeah. No. Continue, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Rujuta Sapkar, and my topic for paper present is visual impairment noted in CKD patients. So CKD, chronic kidney disease, is a rising global public medical issue worldwide, with the prevalence in India being about 17.2%. The visual system is affected as a result of uremia, metabolic imbalance, hypertension, or related to hemodialysis treatment. As the renal and retinal circulation show similar anatomic, pathophysiologic, and physiologic features, assessment of the retinal microvasculature, it gives an opportunity to find early microcirculatory changes associated with CKD. Also, age-related ocular diseases share similar cardiovascular risk factors and pathogenic mechanisms as CKD, thereby increasing the risk of these patients for developing these age-related ocular disorders. So understanding whether a true link exists between CKD and certain eye diseases may provide insights into the development of new screening methods and therapeutic strategies for both the conditions. So screening of these patients would enable to detect early vision-threatening complications so that timely interventions are possible. So therefore, my study aims to find out the visual impairment in chronic kidney disease patients, and it highlights the importance of timely ocular evaluation, thereby preventing blindness. The causes of visual impairment in CKD patients could be amblyopia, cataract, ARMD, glaucoma, optic disc edema, retinopathy, maculopathy, retinal vascular disorder, or retinal detachment. The study aims to find out the prevalence of visual impairment in CKD patients, and my objective was to study the identifiable cause of visual impairment in CKD patients. So this was a prospective study performed on all the patients having CKD at a tertiary care center for a period of over 3 months after approval from the ethical committee, and the sample size was about 118. So all cases of chronic kidney disease were evaluated on the following grounds: vision on Snellen's chart, intraocular pressure measurement on applanation tonometer, slit lamp examination, fundus examination using 90 diopters and IDO, OCT disc, macula, and fundus photo and perimetry were done wherever needed. So all patients with CKD more than 10 years of age, irrespective of gender, were chosen for the study, and patients not willing to participate or willing for dilated evaluation, or at times who couldn't be mobilized for slit lamp evaluation, were excluded from the study. Coming to results and discussion, table 1 shows distribution of CKD patients according to the age and gender. So out of the total 118 cases, 74 were males, accounting for 62.71%, whereas 42 for females, accounting for 37.29%. The most common age group in my study was about 31 to 50 years, with a total of 39.83%, followed by 51 to 70 years, with a total of 30.50%. Coming to next table, which shows distribution of CKD patients based on comorbidities. So out of the 118 patients, 70.31% had a history of hypertension, had a history of some comorbidity. The most common comorbidity in my study was hypertension in about 37.28%, followed by both hypertension and diabetes in 20.33%. So there was a similar study done by Dahal et al. And associates, where they found a similar higher prevalence of hypertension in CKD patients, nearly about 41%, which was comparable to my study, However, they found a slightly higher diabetics, around 32.6, whereas in my study, it was only about 12.7%. Coming to next patient, which shows distribution of CKD based on visual impairment. Out of 118 cases, only 10 had visual impairment, accounting for 8.47%, with cataract being the most common cause in 5.08%, followed by glaucoma, age-related macular degeneration, and retinopathy. So according to the National Health and Examination Nutrition Survey, 2005 to 2008, visual impairment in CKD patients was around 7.7%. And according to Wong et al. In the Singaporean population eye-based study, he observed that there was a greater visual impairment in CKD patients, around 36.1%, with the leading causes being cataract and retinopathy. Next table shows variables in visual impairment in CKD patients. The most common age group in my study being 31 to 50 years, visual impairment was found in 21.27%, with an odds ratio of 40 and a significant p-value. The males, being higher in my study, had a visual impairment in about 12.16%, with a non-significant p-value, indicating a no stronger correlation. So coming to conclusion, chronic kidney disease is a rising, irreversible multi-system disorder. Diabetes and hypertension are the major disorders associated with CKD. High prevalence and strong associations of visual impairment and major eye diseases with CKD is found in the potentially useful group of about 31 to 50 years. So early screening of this productive population of about 31 to 50 years can prevent potential reversible causes of visual impairment, thereby improving the quality of life and economic burden of the society. Irreversible vision loss can occur if not detected early. So we can inform public health initiatives for preventing CKD and by an early screening in the high-risk individuals. Thank you. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rituja.
Yes, sir.
Madam, any questions, please?
Have encountered these kind of patients, and it's very
You have
difficult.
not included vascular regions and
No, actually,
anemia.
I could find retinopathy in only one. I could find visual impairment in associated with retinopathy in only one patient.
Only one, okay.
So I have included those with visual impairment. Otherwise, I had around 40 patients who had retinopathy, but they did not have visual impairment.
I see.
So only one patient with retinopathy had visual impairment. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay.
Did not take a criteria as serum creatinine value above this or something like that.
Serum.
No, ma'am. Actually, we at our tertiary care center, we have a nephrology department. So we initiated with screening all the patients who presented to our nephrology department. So we thought of screening everybody irrespective of their creatinine values, so that we can pick up those early results.
It would have given you more targeted results. If you had taken creatinine value more than 2.2, you would have definitely found some symptoms, because below that the patient is well compensated. His metabolic state is not affected. So if you're going to have a CKD patient who is somewhere around 1.8 or something like that, is well compensated. Organ damage is not so bad. Then you are just going to get it according to his comorbidities like hypertension or diabetes.
Yes.
But if you're going to get symptoms in the eye, then your serum creatinine level plays a very, very important role in your inclusion criteria for the patients.
Okay. Actually, my aim was to screen all the patients which presented to our nephrology department, so that we could pick up the early disorders. So that's why I'll make sure I'll do it next time.
Oh, we all make a mistake when we do our publications and presentations. We have too many things covered under one heading. If you're going to do something very targeted, then only you can say, okay, this is it. Now you took so many patients out of which visual impairment could hardly be picked. But if you had said that serum creatinine more than 2.2, you would have got at least, out of the 100 patients you screened, you would have got 30-40 patients who would have had visual impairment, and then you could have scheduled something where you could have done something for them. Here it is just like an observational study. No? There it would have been an action-packed study.
Okay.
So we have to reduce the variables and then we have to do it.
Yes.
Not that your paper was bad. I'm just trying to guide you how you should do it in
Yes.
future.
Got it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rituja. So this comes to the end of the session. I am thankful to all the judges, Dr. Neeta, Dr. Subhash, Dr. Darshana, for judging this session. Thank you all and goodbye.
Thank you.